Hello! Welcome to another episode of Well Balanced. So, today I'm talking to Kelsey, who is a registered dietitian, and we're going to talk all about women's sports / performance nutrition. So, I'm super excited to talk with her and see what she has to say about just like how to best fuel for workouts and just performance in general, breaking down macronutrients and all of that. So I'm gonna let her in on this combo and then we will get started. Let's see here. I always forget how to do this. See if that works. Oh, there we go.
Hi.
Hi, Kelsey. How are you?
Good. How are you, Kel?
I'm good. Can you hear me okay? I'm outside and I'm using data.
I love it. Old school. No, I'm
Hey,
glad you're enjoying your time outside.
yes, it's a beautiful day, and I apologize for the excessive amount of birds that we have in our backyard. There's
Oh, it's lovely.
constant birds, so hey, very therapeutic, I suppose.
I know. It sounds like springtime.
It is. You're in Denver, so what's the weather like there?
It's actually really beautiful right now. If I sound a little nasally, it's because we've just now hit our spring. And so, like, everything just bloomed, I feel like, all at once. And so we're all kind of like, it's reminding me of those Georgia springs for sure. But
Uh, the pollen is horrible here. It was
yeah,
probably worse like a month ago, so it's past that, thankfully. But
yeah, yeah. So everyone who doesn't know, I actually lived in Georgia, and that's how we got connected initially, living in Atlanta. So I've been in Denver a little over 2 years now, and don't tell my family, but I'm probably not going to go back.
I won't tell Kelly, don't worry.
Yeah.
It was crazy. I was looking back at some random posts and I was like, I remember the healthy peaches and I was like, this
Hmm.
seems like forever ago. So
It
crazy just
was. I
how
know.
everyone's evolved and I love it. So I'm happy
Yeah.
for you.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you hopping on with me and chatting and definitely just trying to educate women, based on tons of different topics and connect with
Yeah.
amazing professionals like yourself. So, we'll start with an introduction just to kind of share a little bit about your story, obviously, what kind of drove you to the nutrition passion in itself, and, personal struggles you went through and all of that.
Yeah. So I think that my story really started as an athlete. I was a competitive gymnast for about 8 years, probably from the age of like 6 to about 12 or so. Um, it's only 6 years, maybe even a little bit longer. But I really
Math is hard.
enjoyed math is hard. I might have started a little bit earlier, but who knows? It was after the '96 Olympics, whenever the girls team won gold in
Hmm.
Atlanta, that I decided to be a gymnast. But then eventually, I figured out, okay, I'm not going to be doing this in the long term. I'm not going to be doing backflips when I'm, 80. So let me figure out something else to do. So that's whenever I became a track and cross country runner and actually ran collegiately at Georgia State in Atlanta. So again, I've always been an athlete. And it was really kind of my own bumpy relationship with food that steered me in the direction of becoming a dietitian. So I had a lot of under eating, very intentional, between both gymnastics and then running, a lot of body composition expectations. And there's a lot of, unfortunate ways that you can meet those expectations. So a lot of disordered eating kind of went on with that. So it was really like as I was getting my education to be a dietitian that I started to embark on a healing journey of like healing my relationship with food, figuring out, what it really is that my body needs. And, the cycle of me trying to restrict and restrict and restrict, it wasn't working. My performance was getting worse and worse. I lost my period. Um, I was injured all the time. And so eventually, kind of coming out of that, that's what catapulted me into my career now is helping women who are active, have kind of a little bit of a similar thread as me as far as a lot of us have had previous history of diet restricting things like that. And so we're kind of getting back to the basics of what is optimal fueling,
Right.
targeting some of those things like body image concerns and navigating those things that are really, really sticky. Because ultimately, we can talk about optimal fueling all day long, but if someone's not in the right headspace for it to really receive that information, that's a big barrier. And that's what I really like with doing with my active females, um, is to kind of bridge that gap between like nutrition, the science, and then eating the behavior.
Right. No, I think that the mental health piece is so important, and I'm
Yeah.
thankful that it's becoming more of a conversation, and we're diving into those, sharing more normal, um, just life of how, our bodies change and how to love it throughout all those different stages. And I think that's really
Yeah.
awesome. So, um, definitely can relate to some of those things as well on my own, and was a very active individual, but it's just crazy how different they can approach nutrition and true health, I think, when it comes to that. So,
Yeah, totally.
um, so we'll start with just like a general breakdown of those macronutrients that, we use to obviously fuel performance, and explaining a little bit why they're important and maybe some just general examples of those sources.
Yeah. So the three macronutrients, these things that are, it's macro because they're big. They're things that we need in large quantities to be able to live optimally for fuel our performance. So those three things are going to be carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So starting off with carbohydrates, because carbs are amazing. These are the
They
things
are.
that are going to provide our muscle with the fuel that it needs to be able to actually produce energy. And so, if you want to be able to run and jump and play with your kids, whatever it is, we need to have adequate carbohydrates to be able to fuel those things. So this can be from things like that we traditionally think of, the breads, the pasta, cereal, rice, but also it can be from things like fruit and beans, and even some dairy products can have carbohydrates. I think that in our current society, carbohydrates have gotten a really bad rap. And
Hmm.
true, there's definitely like a carbohydrate spectrum, right? So we have like the sedentary person on one end, lower carbohydrate, probably better just because they're not doing a lot of their running, jumping, playing. And then we have, our ultra marathon elite endurance athletes who their carbohydrate needs are just insane. And so it's hard to take the two different, into the spectrum. But I think that for active women, we probably need more carbohydrates than we think. It's a big red flag to me whenever I do a food record and we're looking at less than 150 grams of carbs. And that's just not even, um, that's bare minimum, much less like, a lot of women need closer to 300, 400 grams a day to fuel athletic performance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Fat's the next one. So fat is we'll go back to protein actually. So protein is super important for us to build and maintain our lean muscle mass. And it does a lot of other things, but I think that's probably what protein gets a lot of its attention for, especially right now. Everyone's like, oh yes, want to build the muscle and things like that. So um, it can really stoke your metabolism. It's great for neurotransmitter production. I mean, there's a lot of things that protein is great for. So there's different sources. Of course, we have like our animal-based proteins, chicken, fish, eggs, beef, and we've got some of our plant-based sources. So beans, nuts, and seeds, things like that. Um, Most people who eat enough do pretty well with protein. But as I mentioned earlier, under eating is pretty common with a lot of the active females, a lot of this like diet restrict cycles. And so we do see a lot of women who are under eating protein, and it's not helping a lot of their goals.
Right. I think I see that the most for sure.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's like you think about protein, I feel like it's just like chicken and steak, you know what I mean? Or other things you don't tend to think about. It can be, um, I don't know, things like collagen or even bone broth
Mm-hmm.
and things like that have, sources of protein in them. So, um,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's definitely true.
Definitely. And a lot of people have a very skewed protein intake during the day. So think about, a lot of people do really well with getting protein in at dinner. That's where I think that
Hmm.
where a lot of people do really well. But if we kind of look backwards in the day, lunchtime is kind of 50-50. Maybe they have like some chicken on a salad or something like that. Breakfast is a time where a lot of people could really optimize their protein intake. Um, when we think about that muscle protein building process that protein is really known for, it's best, our entire daily protein matters in that equation, but it's actually best to have our protein spread out all throughout the day. So kind of having 4 or 5 boluses, periods of feeding throughout the day, um, that maximizes that muscle building machinery that we have kind of going on in the background. And so that's that's one thing that's a really easy takeaway from something like this is like, okay, just getting in my protein spread in throughout the day.
I think I saw in your stories yesterday, it was, how much protein does your body stop at digesting? And it was interesting. It made me think for a second, and I was like, wait, I know the answer. Um,
Yeah, I know.
but
It's like something that's been so common that has just been like regurgitated, like we can only digest 20 grams of protein at one time. And it's like, that's crazy.
yeah, that would
Your body
be
just doesn't
very,
stop digesting.
that would be
We would,
confusing.
right, right. Um,
So if someone was
but yeah.
to eat, on the sense of more protein forward towards the end of the day versus, sporadically throughout, what would be an impact of doing something like that?
I think again, it's just, less of that muscle building um, machinery is not being turned on quite as much.
Okay, makes
Yeah.
sense.
So again, it's the total daily protein is probably the most important, but really looking at how to optimize it throughout the day is where a lot of people can really, they'll notice probably a lot like better cravings, energy levels, because protein does have a very stabilizing effect on the blood sugar. I think that we think about blood sugar being only important for those people with maybe diabetes, but we all have blood sugars. We
Right.
all want to have stable blood sugars. So protein has a really great impact on that as well.
So, like, what would be some of your favorite sources of protein to recommend for someone who maybe is a little leaner in the breakfast and lunch area?
Yeah, that can be hard, especially I know a lot of women don't even have a big appetite first thing in the morning. So what it can be is just having something really small to start off with. I've seen you having your gut healing gummies, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Those have a little bit of protein in them. So even just starting your day with a little bit of that and then working your way up to a more full breakfast as your metabolism probably heals, as you're eating a little bit more. But I think some really great protein sources, of course, would be like eggs, good quality like chicken or turkey sausage. Um, I like cottage cheese, regular cheese, Greek yogurt, and then the sky's really the limit. So, like, if you wanted to have, I've had ground turkey, like over vegetables and root vegetables with breakfast, just because I was tired of eggs. And
Yes,
so,
I have those
I
moments.
know, yes, like I love a good pastured egg, but I can only have so much in a week.
Yes. I think that's the thing too, is people think that they have to eat breakfast foods in the morning for breakfast. And it's
Hmm.
like, if you have leftovers, you can absolutely make that into a protein or some sort of nutrient dense meal. It's really just getting
Yeah,
something in your body to help you, like you said, stabilize your blood sugar, keep your energy levels, um, you know, manage that cortisol and all of that. So I think that's really cool.
yeah, definitely. And then the last macronutrient is fat. So, whenever I'm creating a nutrition plan, I don't necessarily do strict meal plans or anything like that. In fact, I don't do strict meal plans, but it's mostly, I think fat ends up being kind of like the leftover catch-all, but it's so important. Really important for a lot of our hormone production. We need that good, healthy fat to be able to make our sex hormones. It's critical for being able to absorb fat soluble vitamins, so vitamin A, D, E, and K. Um, a lot of, looking at even some like low fat dieting can be really detrimental on things like testosterone. And even as females, we need to have enough testosterone to be able to build and maintain muscle and have good, energy, sex drive, a lot of those type of things. So low fat dieting is not a great way to optimize performance or hormone health. So lots of good quality sources of fats include, olive oil, avocados, good quality butters, good quality cheeses, nuts and seeds that, prepared in the right way in a good amount. So those are some of my favorite sources.
Do you feel like you see a lot of women coming to you with a still a very low fat type of mindset, fearful of either raising cholesterol levels or just other just stigmas that we've come to believe over the years?
I think that the low fat craze started to fix, in a way, quote unquote, fix a lot of that lower fat mentality. In I do have some former like bikini athletes, so you know the bodybuilding type stuff.
Hmm.
Those clients tend to be a little bit lower in fat. People who undereat in general, you know, kind of it's like macronutrients across the board are just going to be lower.
Right.
You know, carbs, fat, protein. So in general, I see a skewed approach towards like, you know, protein intake is moderate. It's okay, but it could be better. Fat normally actually is either exceeding even what I would normally like to kind of almost redistribute some of that fat into carbohydrates in a periodized way. Periodized just meaning like based on the person's training goals, training cycle, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And so if you were to give either a rough amount per, I know you mentioned protein recently on your feed as well, but just kind of either a gauge to how much people should be getting per meal of those macronutrients, but also,
Mm.
um, what was I gonna, I had it and I forgot it, what it was, but just basically a
It'll
balance
come back around.
and also your thoughts on like tracking macros if you feel like that's beneficial, whether it's for temporary, just to kind of track that, and then obviously move towards more of that intuitive style. But curious what your approach is with that.
Yeah. So to start off with kind of the macro tracking, intuitive eating, it's like it's you tend to fall into like one camp or the other. If you'll notice, I don't align with any one particular method because I think that everything can be incorporated. I would say that I have an intuitive eating slant in the fact that like my goal is to move someone who maybe we do have to track their intake for a little bit because it's like we just have to make sure you're eating enough. Like that has to be bottom line, you know, what
Right.
the goal is. Or someone who doesn't have a lot of nutrition education in general is like, I'm just even struggling identifying like what's a carb, what's a fat, what's a protein. You know, that's an area where some tracking can be helpful. Now, if you're working with a coach and their goal is to never exit away from macro counting, that's a big red flag to me. Eventually, you have to be able to pivot and just learn how to eat like a normal person, you know,
Right.
having these blood sugar balancing mixed macro meals. So, so yeah, that's how we start to lean towards that more intuitive eating approach eventually. And that's typically how I work with a lot of my clients.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think it can be a very helpful resource, especially if you've come from restrictive dieting or, even some sort of eating disorder in a way. But I think it's something that eventually you'd like to feel empowered to learn how your body feels because we're all different, and that bio
Right.
individuality is so important. Um,
Right. And I think that there's also ways like with the software that I use, clients can put in information, but I can actually hide any of like the quantitative data. So like carbs,
hmm,
fats, protein, calories, et cetera. I can actually hide that information so that they see what they're putting in, but I'm the only one that sees the actual like nutrition breakdown. And it's kind of nice to have a little bit of that separation, especially for someone who doesn't have maybe the best relationship with food, because it's like, okay, I can give you feedback on like, yes, I can see you're increasing protein, you've increased carbohydrates, like awesome work, without them having to worry about hitting a specific number. That can be really overwhelming for someone, especially if they
absolutely.
are kind of healing from, not such a great relationship with food.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I think it's just showing there's, baby steps in this process. It's not going to be, you're going to go from 0 to 100 in a day. You're going to learn and find the ratios that work best for you and your body. Um,
Yeah.
so I think, so the other question in that was, is there a certain, what's your typical ideal goal in those macronutrient ranges per meal, or like even like an idea of just like a fistful type of approach? Like, how would you
Hmm.
kind of explain that to somebody, I guess?
Yeah. So, on the scientific sense, when we look at protein, for instance, it's about zero point 0.4 grams per kilogram of body weight. I know that in America we don't use kilograms very often. I convert to kilos pretty easily because I do a lot of like weightlifting, and that's what we do a lot with our job is converting things to kilograms. But um, for instance, that for me that would be I think it would be about like I'm 59 kilos, so I have to do the math, but it would be probably a little bit less than 25 grams, for instance, per meal.
Okay.
That equates to probably about the size of the palm of my hand. So for most females, the size of the palm of your hand is a pretty good estimator of about what protein you need per meal. And that's assuming at least 3 meals, maybe another couple of snacks in during the day.
Okay.
As far as carbs and fat, that's kind of the area where it's really dependent on a person's energy needs. So, we kind of, my job and what we really see in the sports performance world is, keeping protein as constant probably as possible throughout the day. Of course, that's going to fluctuate just because of individual differences and things like that. But the carbs and fats can really be dependent on, again, like I said, the person's energy needs. So as long as you've got all three of those things there, you can look at some of those subjective measures of how you feel to know, just how much you need to go up or down. So if you notice that your energy level is really poor throughout the day and you're like, you know what, I actually didn't have I had a lot of vegetables with lunch, but I didn't have any carbohydrates. I'm feeling pretty low energy. Maybe tomorrow I'll add in some sweet potatoes or some quinoa, rice, whatever it is. See how my energy level feels. That's kind of the way that I like to approach it. It's just kind of taking notice of how you feel throughout the day and then adjusting accordingly.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I like that a lot. And I think you did the glucose monitor at one point, didn't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's so interesting that not only like what's on your plate, but the order in which you can consume your food can also dictate those things. And I think that was really fascinating. When you were speaking to that, did you find that was something that you were kind of shocked by?
I mean, it makes sense just from the science of how we break those things down. So carbohydrates, especially more simple carbohydrates, tend to be broken down the most quickly. So, if I'm eating a potato first and then having the steak and then having the broccoli, the protein from the potato, from the steak, and then the fiber from the broccoli, those things are going to take a little bit longer to digest.
Right.
And so, if it's taking you 25 minutes to eat a meal, you can definitely see some blood sugar abnormalities with that, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, that's definitely something I would like to do just to see how simple things can affect that.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Did you have something to say?
I was going to say, unless you're someone I love bowls. I love layering food.
Yeah.
It's just one of my favorite things. I almost always eat from a serving bowl, which is crazy because I'm 5'3", but I eat a lot for someone my size.
I agree to that.
Yeah. Which I like. I think it's that should be our goal as females is how much possible food, how much food can I tolerate, and still maybe meet my metabolic goals. If you had body composition goals, whatever, I think that we need to de-emphasize a lot of the body composition goals, but I get it. Everyone wants to feel comfortable in their skin.
Right.
Yeah, we should be trying to eat heaps of food and yeah.
I agree. Just eat all day long. Let's just eat all day long.
Yeah.
Okay. So one thing in specific that I wanted to discuss is fueling, pre and post training, because I know that's something that you're definitely very in tune with. So just in terms of whether you're a marathon runner or you're doing more strength training, does that change based off of those macros and how you're fueling and maybe some big no-nos of things to do, not to do?
The fueling for different, it can be really dependent on the type of exercise and the person's individual tolerance to whatever type of food they're having. So I'll give you an example. People who do a lot of things like running, their ability to tolerate food just because of the jostling nature of running, they might be someone who does a little bit better with a more liquid-based or really easy to digest pre-workout. So something like a banana and peanut butter, or even white bread. Everyone's like, ooh, must have wheat bread or brown rice, whatever. But having those quick to digest carbohydrates is really the name of the game when it comes to that pre-workout. And that goes for the runners that I mentioned, but even things like strength athletes. I never train, I'm a strength athlete. I never train on an empty stomach because every time that I'm picking that barbell up and putting it back down, these are glycogen dependent because, it's not an aerobic workout.
Right.
And so we need to have that really, fast energy production. I would say so, yes, carbohydrates being the primary thing that we need, and then kind of a lot of women actually do well with a little bit of protein before working out. And there's actually some really interesting research that um, it can prevent some of the protein muscle breakdown that we might see with females. So I think even having a couple of scoops of collagen, there's actually some research about collagen and tendon health before it when taken before a workout, which is really interesting. Um, or even just a good quality, maybe half a scoop of whey protein or whatever good quality protein you have. That can be a really good strategy.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So like if someone
Yeah,
was, what is like the carb, like I feel like typically when they do marathons and things like that, the carb loading comes up as like a big thing. So do you feel like
yeah.
that's something that is correct or, is something that's needed, but also needs those proteins and fats as well?
So yeah, carbohydrate loading is a very specific protocol, and it normally requires you to have about 8 to 12 grams per kilo of carbs for like a couple of days leading up to maybe like a marathon. Now, that's an enormous amount of carbohydrates. That is it's a job to be able
Right.
to have that much. So, and carbohydrate loading is probably reserved for those people who have done a lot of marathons. They're really pushing the envelope with their performance, and they're really burning through glycogen very, very quickly. That's what carbohydrate is really loaded is there for. Is really super saturating the muscles with carbohydrate so that they're available to be used during those really long bouts of activity. For most recreational marathon runners, that's probably not going to be something that's going to be really beneficial. The lower the intensity of the exercise, the more that we tap into our fat stores, which we have an infinite amount of fat stores. Even the thinnest person has quite a bit of fat stores on the body. So for those people, that carbohydrate supercompensation is going to be a lot less applicable. Now, for even just going out for maybe a long run, maybe you're not in training for anything, but you enjoy that more endurance type exercise. Again, still having those carbohydrates on board, especially after maybe you were sleeping all night. So you've been in a
Hmm.
fasted state. Liver glycogen, so our liver carbohydrate stores are going to be really low. And liver carbohydrate stores still have a role whenever we do have those endurance sessions. So we want to be able to replenish that before our exercise.
Absolutely. That makes sense. Again,
Yeah,
just eat a bunch of food.
I know. Yeah, it's so funny because it feels like my job is, there's so much conflicting information out there, and people want what's like trendy or like they think it has to be magical,
Right.
and it doesn't have to be. It's not magic. It's like just eat enough food, don't go too long without eating, sleep, eat good
Hydrate,
quality,
manage your stress.
hydrate. I know. See
Done.
the sunshine. It's like things that we
Exactly.
did so intuitively before. Um, and yet just, our lifestyle nowadays, so much information that's at our fingertips has really made it confusing, which I totally get from being a
Absolutely.
consumer standpoint. So that's one of the things that I really enjoy about working with clients is at the end, I think that you just feel, um, they're less overwhelmed. They're like, okay, I feel like I can be confident and that I know how to fuel my body and then it's not as complicated as I made it out to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think simplicity is key. And again, bio individual, everyone's different, we all need different
Mhm.
things and just listening to what you need. Um,
Yeah.
okay. So last question is just maybe like your top three no-nos of what to do if someone either is wanting to optimize performance or just about women's health in general, things that you see with a lot of women and what they kind of struggle with.
Yeah. I mean, number one, if we were to go like hierarchy of nutrition, okay, so like baseline nutrition, again, we have to be eating enough, have to be hydrating enough. We like to often step over like that step
Right.
and then go straight to things like supplements or, I know that in the women's health space, whether we're training with our cycle, eating with our cycle, super trendy. And I think that there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do, but like if we're trying to optimize our cycle with our training or nutrition, but we're not eating enough, we're missing the point, right? And
Right.
so we've got to be able to make sure we've got that really good foundation. So that to me is number one. The Another big thing is if you are going to be embarking on some type of nutrition strategy, I don't really like to call it like diets and things like that, but if you're eliminating whole food groups, if it's causing you to think about food in a really negative way, or it's really impeding a lot on your lifestyle, it's probably not the best strategy for you. And that's for both optimizing health and performance. Because we can't live in a world where we're just thinking about food constantly. You know,
Right.
most of us have like jobs, families, loved ones that we have to take care of. So, you know, that that's not a long-term strategy. Um, and then I think the last one would be we often think about our body composition because that tends to be what people come to me for is either optimizing performance or body composition. I don't like to do body composition as the sole goal. Like if someone's like, I just want to lose weight,
Right.
um, that's not my jam. I get it, but there has to be some other thing that's going on that's even more meaningful than weight loss. So I think, you know, kind of what the gist that I'm getting at is that if we're focused on body composition, um, there's so many other things that we can focus on, whether it's performance, sleep, etc. I think people think about just diet and exercise being the two variables to manipulate when it comes to body composition, but there's a lot of stress, whether it's physical
Mm-hmm.
stress, emotional stress, the thoughts that we're telling ourselves can be really stressful, right? And so that's a big component. Um, Sleep, circadian rhythm support, super, super helpful there. So it's really interesting whenever you are working with a dietitian. You know, we may talk about food quite a bit, or we may have an entire coaching session where we're not talking about food at all. We're
Right.
talking about like um, someone's like, I go all day without eating. Well, why is that? I'm taking care of the kids. We're doing this. We're doing that. I'm like, is it important to you that you have energy to do those things? Yes. Okay, great. Well, then let's set a reminder on your phone that you can actually do that you take 10 minutes to have your snack or whatever. So all I to say is that there's a lot that goes into food, nutrition, lifestyle that isn't just, it doesn't have to be perfect. Um,
Progress,
and
not perfection.
yeah, definitely.
I love
Yeah.
that. No, that's a really helpful. I think that, yeah, it's just taking things one day at a time. But again, you have to take care of yourself. And I think the self-care aspect of things, and that can be addressing internal and external stressors, they play such a big role within our health that I think if we didn't have stress, we'd all be healthy, to be honest. It's like we all could just manage the stress, but it's never going to go away.
It really is. It's like the
So
root cause, I feel like.
yes, and I feel like it obviously ebbs and flows, but obviously getting to the managing it as best as we can is the key. Um,
Yeah.
well, I really appreciate you hopping on and chatting with me, and I just want to finish with like
Yeah.
you sharing how any woman could reach out and get in touch with you, the services that you offer, and where they can find you.
Oh, this was a blast, and it's just so fun getting to talk with an old friend, and of course talk about things that I love to. That's like my big passion.
Yes,
So yeah, you
I
can
love it.
find me on Instagram, Kelsey_Smith_RD, and you can find a link in my bio to my website. So I do a lot of, again, it's women's performance coaching. And I say performance because you don't have to be an elite athlete to benefit from it. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be actively engaged in a sport per se. This performance can be, of course, in the gym, or it could just be, showing up in the boardroom or, just with your family. So that's the type of coaching that I offer. And I love being able to help women because I think that we're just all magical creatures and
We are
we're so
magical.
fun. We are magical, right?
Bunch of unicorns.
That's right.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'll definitely link this share this on my page so that anyone can go back to watch it. I'll tag you and definitely will continue to support, and I love staying connected.
Thanks, Kel. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Have a good day.
Okay, bye.
Bye.